are talking about Moses very slowly, we keep saying. I want you to know going into this today that when you teach 20 lessons in a row, the odds of us overlapping something are pretty good. Today I'm going to be bouncing off of something that we heard from Nabil. I can't even remember if it was last week or the week before. It was so funny. One day someone emailed me and she said, hey, about 3 years ago you taught this one lesson. And she said, you made this one comment. Can you tell me which lesson that was? I started laughing. I'm like, oh, honey, you have no idea. I don't even know what I taught. Like someone asked me, we were just talking about that. She goes, oh, I loved your lesson last week. And I said, I don't even remember it. Like it's gone out of my brain. So if we do, I think it's really good. I'm actually listening. Nabil Qureshi has the coolest thing on his, an 18-minute YouTube video on the Trinity, how to explain the Trinity to someone. And I have listened to it now 3 going on 4 times because it's so good and it's so powerful and I need to get it in my brain, so sometimes repetition is really good. And this subject we're talking about needs to be repeated, I think, over and over and over again for us. Here's where we'll start. There's a story of Billy Graham. I know I've told this to you before, so those of you that think like, oh, she already told me this. You've heard this already. He was visiting a city with one of his crusades. He was writing a letter to someone looking for a post office. A little boy was walking along, and Billy said, do you know where a post office is? And he told him. Because Billy cares about people's salvation, he said, hey, why don't you come to the arena tomorrow night so I can tell you how to get to heaven? And the little boy said, how can you know how to get to heaven if you don't know how to get to the post office? Okay. Now, so true, so true. But today I want to talk about this whole idea that you and I have the greatest news known to man. And if you say that you're a follower of Jesus, then we have not only the privilege, but the responsibility to share that with other people. And we're going to learn that from actually one verse in Exodus. We're going to pick up our story here. I think we're in chapter 12, Exodus 12, verse 37. The Israelites now have just come out of Egypt. The 10th plague has happened. Pharaoh says, go, get out. So now Moses is leading the people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. There was about 200,000 men on foot, besides women and children. So that's where people get, there's 2 million people that are coming out of Egypt, because when you think 600,000 men, they probably, most of them have wives, have 2, 3, 4, 5 children. And so that's where you get the 2 million people leaving Egypt. Here is my verse that I want to talk about today. Many other people went up with them. Now, most people just pass right over that, but when I read it, I thought, wait a minute. Many other people left with the Israelites out of Egypt. Now, that could have been Egyptians. I'm assuming it probably was. It could have been people from other countries. I don't know who was there. The Bible is very silent on that. But my thinking is this: many other people walked out of Egypt that day. And I think the reason for it is because they just saw what this awesome, powerful God just did to their land. He basically just wiped out like a lot of things that were going on there. And he was so powerful, he just killed the firstborn of every Egyptian family. He had frogs and locusts, and it just destroyed the land. And this is a powerful God that has that much control over all of those things. And I think whoever it was that walked out of Egypt with the Israelites said, oh my gosh, I have to follow this God. But I think most people didn't know who he was. And I think that even though the Israelites were slaves, I think there were some of them that cared enough about the Egyptians or whoever these other people were to say, I have to tell you who this God is. Because that is our job if you and I are followers of Jesus. And the problem is most of us don't even know how to do that. A young salesman was disappointed about losing a sale, and he went to his boss and he said, I guess it just tells you that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And his boss said, I want you to listen to what I'm saying. I want you to take my advice. Your job is not to make him drink. Your job is to make him thirsty. Because if he's thirsty, he's going to want to drink. See, that's what our lives should look like. People should see us so completely different than everybody else. They should be able to see that when we go through trials, or our husband walks out the door, or we get cancer or whatever, that we handle it so completely different because we have peace. We know this God that is in control of my life. We just know that. And because that peace, it should make other people thirsty to want to know this God. For a lot of us, there's no fear in dying. Like, I don't even worry about dying. I know exactly where I'm going when I die, but a lot of people don't. And so we need to be so exuding this to people that they're like, wait a minute, what do you have that I need? Sadly, we look around on TV or we see street preachers and we see that they're spouting this false gospel and false Jesus and false way to heaven. And so we're going to show you a really corny video. I know David just dies when I give him these videos. And it's so corny, but you got 3 minutes of it, okay? But I want you to see this is what people are seeing, and they're saying, if that's Christianity, no thank you. So watch this. David can shut your eyes the whole time.
Pastor Pearl.
Yes. Yes, Junior.
Describe evangelism.
Describe evangelism. Well, the best way to tell people about Jesus. Love that name. The best way to tell people about Jesus is to tell them about hell.
The air is here, and we have to understand that to live in the free world, people must truly move now.
Evangelism. It is...
Evangelism, it's like, Evangelism is simple. God longs for you to be successful. He longs for you to have things, and that's attractive to people because people like things.
It's important to project yourself and the gospel in a way that is attractive to people.
Ecclesiastes and left you to do it. Understand now.
We have to understand something. We don't serve a God who longs for us to be Job Christians. People who have nothing. You think that's what God wants? To be people from I don't think so.
But if you're not, and you understand forever, there's no understanding of the deal.
Here's what I'm talking about. How about we choose to be Noah's, huh? That boy had a boat. Huh? How about Solomon with all of his splendor? That's what I'm saying right there. How about David after he became king? That boy had some stuff.
Hell is real.
So what do you do for a living?
I'm a program manager.
Oh, yeah.
Just
There's pretty good money in that, huh?
Guess so.
Is that you tithe on that?
Do you tithe on it? All right, as weird as that was, okay? This is how you know you love Jesus. When you see that and you want to throw up. Like, it is so upsetting to you because you're just like, what are people doing? And yet, that's the craziness that people are looking at. Cheyenne was at a festival thing a couple months ago, and she called me the next day, and she said, Mom, there were some street preachers. I literally got in a fight with one of them. And she said, I was crying. I was so upset. She goes, they're out there spouting hatred and bigotry and all of these horrible things in the name of Jesus. And she said, I kept saying, you can't do that. And the reason is because she was saying, these people that were standing there watching these street preachers are like, they're so desperate to find God, and yet they will never find him that way. So here's the moral to that story. Do not kidnap people, okay? Do not shout in a megaphone and act weird, okay? Because Jesus did not do that. That is not the things that he did. Sharing Jesus for us is how I think the Israelites who shared with those people that left Egypt, I think that's what they did. You know what I think? That they lived their faith. I think their faith was the absolute core of who they were. And so they went to work and they worked with integrity, and the Egyptian bosses are like, why are you so nice and why are you so kind? And they're like, because I'm a believer in the one true God. I bet when the plagues started It gave the Israelites this grand platform. You and I have a big platform. When we see the Twin Towers coming down and we see, 9/11 or what happened in Vegas and shootings and all the ISIS and all the crazy stuff, that's a platform for us to jump off of and say, I know the world looks crazy, but I want to give you some hope in life. And it comes through Jesus. Here's my fear. There was a drill officer. He was putting his men through some exercises. So he said, lay on your back. And he said, raise your legs. I was actually going to do this for you as an example, but then I knew I'd never get up again, so decided not to do that. Raise your legs. Now move them like you're riding a bicycle, okay? And one guy decided not to do that. He laid on his back and put his feet up in the air. And the drill officer said, what are you doing? What's the deal? And he said, I'm coasting downhill. And I said, that would be me, okay? But here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of that you and I are coasting downhill when it comes about this whole idea that you and I need to tell people about Jesus. There is this grand story in the Bible, and the Israelites had part of this, telling the Egyptians and those they knew how to follow this God. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you have that same responsibility. Look at our next screen here. If this is true, what is my part? I want you to know that if you claim to be a Christian, you are not a Christian just so that you can go to heaven. You are a Christian because God saved you so that you have this unbelievable story that you can turn around and share with other people so they can go to heaven too. But I think Christianity is in serious trouble because nobody's opening their mouth and talking about Jesus. If you know him, if you've given your life to him, I want to tell you this. The day you made that decision should have been the most greatest day you've ever had in your life. Not the day you got married, not the day you had a child, not the day you got healed from your sickness. The day you asked Jesus in your life has to be the most important thing that ever happened to you. And this is why. And I know you can't see this very well, and you guys can't either, but look at these when you get back. Because you went from here, which was eternity spent in hell. Jesus reached down, grabbed a hold of you, pulled you out, and put you over here to eternity in heaven. Now, that is a huge deal, and it should have been the greatest moment in our life, something that was so great that we cannot keep it to ourselves, but we take it for granted. And I'm going to tell you why I do the same thing. I'm not saying this for you, I'm saying this for me, and this just happened in the last couple months. Came to fruition last week. I told you we're building a house, we're trying to build a house. We have some land up at Lake Pleasant, and we have this, between our land, to get to our land, we had to get an easement from a man. Rob found out his name, we went all the way out to Mesa to go meet with him, and Kathy, so we met Jimmy and Kathy, and there's just those people that you just kind of click with, and we're just like, you know what, we just want to be your friends. And to my knowledge, they were not Christians at all, and so we kept thinking, they need Jesus, and we're going to just kind of take them to lunch and hang out with them and do all of these things, and that was great. So in the midst of all this, Kathy was asked what we did, and Rob said we do dental, and then I said I teach Bible, and there's always a really weird, awkward silence when you tell somebody that. So they gave us the easement, and then we sent him a cookie bouquet, and she sent me a thank you note. And the thank you note had a Bible verse on it. And I was so shocked because I didn't think they were Christians. So in the midst of that, I knew she liked to read, so I decided, all right, I'm going to start slow here. I'm going to just send her some Christian novels. So I sent her some Joel Rosenberg novels, and right after she got them, she called me and she said, I'm in the hospital. And I'm like, why are you in the hospital? And she said, I don't know, something's wrong. So I went down to the hospital and gave her 3 of our books. Remind Me, The Equation, and Discourage. Because I thought, you know what? I don't want to I'm embarrassed to tell you this. I don't want to be all Jesus freak on her, and I don't want to be all like Bible thumper. And actually, they intimidated me. And I can't even explain to you why that was, but they did. And so I was going to walk really lightly with them. So I gave her all the books, but not one way, which, there's a bunch of them over here, is this. It's the gospel. It's how you get to heaven, how you move from there to there, and it's all about Jesus. And I gave them our books, and not that. So she gets out of the hospital, we said, hey, a church opened up in that area. Do you want to go to Christmas service with us? And then he got sick and they couldn't go. And she said, we'll do it in January. We went away. She calls me the 1st of January and she said, I've been in the hospital. And I said, what is wrong? This time I said, all right, I'm going to run down there. We bought them each Bibles for Christmas with their names on them. I don't think they've ever owned a Bible to my knowledge. We engraved their names on them, and I took them a one-way. But here, she's just not feeling good. She said, it's hard for me to read. I can't read. My eyes are not working very well, and I'm just kind of... And so I didn't even talk to her. And the conversation I did have with her, she would say, like, we're kind of spiritual, and every opportunity to share this great news about which place you're going to go to when you die. Now, we had plans to go eat Mexican food and go see The Greatest Showman. Okay, that was the plans for her. But she just seemed to get worse and worse. She sent me this text after she got the Bibles. Look at the very bottom. You have come into our lives at a much-needed time. Now, I have no idea what that meant. None. I just didn't know. I realized last Saturday night what my problem was, and it's that I didn't open my mouth. Jimmy called me in the afternoon, and he said, I want you to know that Kathy's dying. And I said, what? I said, what do you mean she's dying? He said, we were just at the doctor, or at the hospital this morning, and she is like, everything's shutting down. She's not going to make it. And I hung up the phone, and I looked at Rob, and I said, Rob, I never shared the gospel with her. I never told her about Jesus. Like, this is at stake right here. Hell or heaven. And I never took the time to sit down and say, Kathy, I don't know where you are spiritually, but if you don't know Jesus, that's your home for eternity. And I was just like I didn't know what to do. So I looked at Rob, and he said, well, you probably need to get to the hospital. So the hospital's an hour away. So I drove all the way down to Mesa. It's 7:30 at night. I go running in. I get to ICU. It's closed. I called on a little phone, and I'm like, hi, I need to see Kathy. I'm sorry, you'll have to come back tomorrow. I'm sobbing. I'm hysterical. I'm like, you don't understand. I have to talk to her tonight. I have to speak with her. Like, I don't even care. I need 3 minutes of her time, because this is what I knew. If she didn't know about Jesus, then this is where she's going to go if she dies. And I was so devastated. I couldn't even believe this was happening. Like, why in the world wouldn't I tell her? Why didn't I do that? So he let me in. He knew I was distraught. And I came into her room, and she was like, had all the breathing stuff on, and she was in that whole total coma thing. And I'm looking at her, and I'm holding her hand, and I'm thinking, and all I could say to her was, Kathy, I don't even know if you can hear me, but if you can, I need you to just know Jesus is the only way to God, and you have to accept him in your heart. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you about this sooner. And I prayed. I just sat there over her, and I prayed, and I said, God, don't let her die if she doesn't know you. Like, this is at stake. This is all I can think about is that picture and that picture. And it's on my brain for eternity now. So I walked out, and I looked at the girl, the nurse, and I said, please tell me she's not going to die. Like, I just need to know that. And she said, she can hear you. And I said, I don't think she could. I said, she didn't move her hands. She didn't anything. And she said, well, she might be able to hear you. So she said she might get better. And I got a call at 7 o'clock in the morning, and Jimmy said she died at 4 in the morning. And I just said, God, I'm so sorry. Like, here I have the greatest news on earth. And why in the world was I intimidated, or that I just didn't think enough to even share with her? Here, have a book. Hope you can read it. Okay, she's in the hospital, for crying out loud. Wouldn't that give me my first clue that maybe I should open my mouth just a little bit more? So anyway, I walked out of the hospital that night, and I just realized that, you know what? This is our job as followers of Jesus. Most people don't know that. They just think they're here, and God's supposed to make them happy and wealthy and healthy and all the crazy garbage that you see on that video. And it is nothing to do with that. When you give your life to Jesus, when I give my life to Jesus, it has to be about telling people that this is what's at stake. Eternity is at stake, and where she is, I don't know. I know it will haunt me until the day I die. That's how I feel about it. I didn't say anything. Romans 10:14 says this. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? How in the world is she going to know anything? How is she going to know who to believe in if someone doesn't tell her? How are they to believe in him of whom they've never heard? How are they to hear without someone preaching? See, we hear that verse and we think, oh, that's my pastor's job. No, it's not. It's your job and it's my job, and we need to look around the sphere of people that we are involved in, at work, at soccer practice, at dance practice, on the golf course, who you play cards with. Like, these are the people that's their eternal destination, one or the other, and we have to say something to let them know. We don't understand the scope of the decision that you and I make when we become followers of Jesus. It's not about us any longer. A woman asked her bright 4-year-old son, Benji, do you want to receive Christ? He said, no, I don't think I want the responsibility. See, we forget that you and I have the responsibility to tell people about Jesus. That's just who we are. That's just what happens when we become a Christian. It is our responsibility, and God expects that of his followers. We see that in John 17:18. Jesus is praying to the Father, and he says, just as you commissioned and sent me into the world, I also have commissioned and sent them, you, me, believers, into the world to tell people how to get to heaven. John 17:20, Jesus is praying again. He says, my prayer is not for them alone. Pray also for those who will believe in me. How? Through their message. People are not going to know how to get to heaven if we don't talk about it. 2 Timothy 4 says this, preach the word. Most of us think that's our preachers, but that's not true. It's you and me. It's our job to preach, tell people the word. Be prepared. Be prepared in season and out of season. That's our job, to know what we believe so that we can tell other people. Verse 5 says, but you keep your head in all situations. I did not keep my head in this situation. If you see someone in the hospital, don't you think my head would say, hey, maybe you should be a little bit more bold about telling someone about your faith? I didn't. My head was not in the game. He goes on to say, do the work of an evangelist, discharge the duties of your ministry. We're all supposed to be evangelists. We have the answer. It's our job to open our mouths and talk about it. Because of this, because people actually opened their mouth, I do believe that people walked away from Egypt, their homeland. They walked away from everything they knew to follow the one true God. And I think it was because somebody was there to tell them who this God was and why they needed to follow him. That is our job. Campus Crusade calls it way of life witnessing. I saw this. I realize everyone does things differently. That's just the way it is. We have all these different ways that we can tell people about Christ, and since a lot of us don't want to open our mouths, and I heard something yesterday. I had breakfast with a girl, and she was telling me that her husband, they love to do ministry, and they have a lot of small groups. She was telling me that her husband was on some kind of a motorcycle ride or something, and they happened to pull in at Wickenburg, and there was this at a gas station they'd never been to. As Todd was walking by, he noticed a girl sitting in her car just sobbing her eyes out. And he knocked on the window and she rolled it down like this much, and he said, are you okay? And she's like, I'm fine. He goes, do you want to talk about it? Nope. Can I pray for you? Nope. And then he just moved on. The men that he was with said, if she's still there, we need to go back and talk to her. So all men come out, and she's still there. And this is a woman in a car and a bunch of men. He knocks on the window again. She rolls it down. He said, look, I don't know what's going on, but, I would let me give you my email address. My wife and I, we teach Bible stuff, and if you are ever interested and want to, talk to my wife about whatever's bothering you. And she ended up emailing him, and she's been going to church with him every week. Okay, it literally, that one encounter changed this girl's entire life. And I thought, but what if we just started looking at life like that? Like everything we go during the day, like for me, most of you know this, I love to go to the movies. So now I make it absolutely, it's like I go to the movies with the intent, who can I talk to? Who can I invite to Bible study? Who can I tell about? And for me, it's just inviting people to Bible study, not because I want to grow a Bible study, but because I know if they come here, they're going to hear about Jesus, and hopefully they'll give their life to him. That's all that matters to me. So now I'm standing in line at the movie theater, and if someone's behind me, I make it a point. Hey, what are you seeing today? Oh, that's a great movie. Oh, I saw it yesterday. Oh, I did. And we have this conversation. I figure if they're in the movies in the middle of the week, then maybe she has time. So I pull out a card, a Bible study card. I'm like, hey, I don't know what you're doing on Wednesdays. We'd love to have you come to Bible study. And that's it. Now, she may never come. She may come someday. Maybe she watches it online and she gets saved, and we'll never know that until we get to heaven. See, we have to look at our days not through, well, what's about me? What about me? We look around where we're at and we say, God, how can I be of service to you? Bring someone along to me? And it can be anything. For those of you, I know it's really weird. Like I put a bunch of one-way books over here for you. One way, it's so simple. It's the gospel handed to someone. Pick them up over here. We sell them in packs for $10 a pack. They're way more expensive to even print than that. But our point is, I want to get this gospel out to people. Some of you have people that work for you that are Spanish, or that you go to the Mexican food restaurant and you love these people and they speak mostly Spanish. Here you go, one way in Spanish. They're over there too. If I named how many girls here go to their Vietnamese nail places, here you go, one way in Vietnamese over there. Like we have to go places and say, you know what? I need to share. You can't even understand what they're saying. But this will tell them that they need Jesus if they want to go to heaven. For some of you, if you know anyone that likes Chinese food and they have Chinese restaurants, here's in Chinese. Like literally, we even have it in Italian. I didn't bring them, but here's what I want you to know. You have no idea what one small encounter with sharing the gospel with someone will do. No idea. I think that was our next screen. Sorry, Melody, I kind of ruined that for you. Take Edward Kimball, for example. Most people have never, ever heard of Edward Kimball. Here's his picture. Here he is. In 1855, he was a Sunday school teacher. He prayed for all of his hyper little boys that were in class with him, but he was very, very intentional. And he said, here's the deal. Every one of my students will know what it means to know Jesus and why this is important, because their eternity is at stake. I have to make sure they know. He said one boy just didn't seem to grasp it, just couldn't understand what it meant to follow Christ or what that even meant. So Edward took his Saturday and went to the shoe store where this boy was working. The boy stocked shoes. He went to him and said, look, I don't think you understand how important this decision is that you need to make for Christ. And I want to tell you why. And he shared the gospel with him. And the boy became a follower of Christ. His name, here's his next picture, Dwight L. Moody. There you go. Moody Bible, Moody Institute, all of this. Moody preached Christ to like 2 different continents. The amount of people that came to know Jesus through him was just unbelievable. Under Moody, another man's heart was touched. His name was, here's the next picture, Wilbur Chapman. He became an evangelist under Moody, and then he was putting on his own like evangelistic crusades. And here's another picture. This is Billy Sunday. He was a baseball player, and he just happened to have the day off. And he goes there, and he's like, I think I need Jesus. He gave his life to Jesus. Through him came a man by the name of Mordecai Ham. Here's this picture. Mordecai was a very theatrical person, apparently. He understood this concept. So when he was out telling people about the crusades that night, come to hear about Jesus, he would drive a hearse around the city inviting people, because he knows that when you die, it's more important where you go when you die than what happens on this earth today. Mordecai Ham was in North Carolina, and he was doing this big crusade there, and there was a high school right across the street, and the high school was up in arms about something, and so all the high school kids were going to go over and protest, and one little boy named Billy Frank, he decided he was going to go that night just to see what the teenager boys were going to do. And so he shows up, and here's the message, comes back the night after, becomes a follower of Christ, and we know him as, here you go, Billy Graham. All because 100 years before, one man took time out of his day to say, you know what? I have got to go share the gospel so that this little boy understands what it means to follow Christ. It is so important. 2.2 billion people have heard the gospel because one man decided to share him with in a shoe store one night to someone. Think about how far-reaching that one encounter did. See, you and I have encounters every single day of our life. And the matter is, what are we going to do with it? If you are here, I want to encourage you, if you are here and you work with high school kids or college kids or youth kids or whatever it is, and you feel like quitting, you think like, I'm never getting through to them. I want you to always remember the story about Kimball, because all it takes is one. One. When I was in high school, I had a woman that came alongside of me from Campus Crusade, and she found out about this Bible study, and I wrote her back, and I said, you have no idea the influence I had. I was a bratty high school student, and I didn't want to go to Bible study, and that was stupid to me, and here she came alongside of me, and I said, I am here today because of what you did in my life. You have no idea what that does for people. Here's our next slide. Never underestimate the influence you have in this world if you are sharing your faith. We have the most important message, and we have to get it out. It's hard to imagine the effect that the Israelites had on the Egyptians that day when a lot of them walked away from their homeland, all because some faithful Israelites loved God enough and realized the importance of this, that they shared this amazing God with them, and they left their homeland to follow him. A century ago, a band of brave souls known as the One-Way Missionaries purchased a one-way ticket to the mission field. They set out from the port knowing they would never, ever see their loved ones again. It was like, look, I've given my life to Jesus. I'm going to a far land. I will never see my family again. I totally understand that, totally sold out for Jesus. They set out. A.W. Milne was one of the missionaries. He went to the South Pacific. He knew that every other missionary that went to where he was going were killed by headhunters the minute they got there. And he knew that he most likely would die the minute he got there. He didn't care, and this is why. He said he knew when he became a follower of Jesus, he had to die to himself. And that's what we don't understand in this whole goofy Americanized Christianity. We just think this life is about us, and it's not. It's about him. And so we have to learn to die to ourselves, and that's really hard in the culture that you and I live in. But this man did. 35 years later, he ended up staying with that tribe. This is what they put on his tombstone on this slide. When he came, there was no light. When he left, there was no darkness. See, what I want us to know today is that we have to be that kind of a light. Matthew 5:14 says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone around them. Think about that. You and I have this light, and this light is supposed to tell people that they're going to spend eternity in hell. And yet we have something so great to offer them, and we have to be so filled with this light that we can go out and do that. Verse 16 says, in the same way, you let your light shine before men so that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. What does it mean to be a Christian? I mean, really, if you really want to get down to that, what does it really even mean to even, dear Jesus, come in my heart? What does that even mean? Because a lot of people think it's just, oh, I just asked Jesus in my heart, and I got baptized, and I go to church, and all is good. I told this joke in this story in Proverbs. It actually made me laugh, so I think you'll get a kick out of it. I find some good stuff there, and I feel like I have to tell you guys too. So there was 4 pastors, and they were having a meeting on Monday morning. They met every Monday to talk about their churches and what was going on. And one of the pastors says, I have a serious problem with bats. And he said, I don't know what to do with them. The second pastor said, you know what I did? I just took my grandfather's shotgun, just pointed up and just started shooting them all. And he said, well, did that get rid of them? And he said, no. He said, I do have a lot of holes in my ceiling now, but the bats are still there. The second pastor said, well, I did something different. He said, he goes, I'm an animal lover, so whether they're bats or dogs, whatever, doesn't matter. He said, so I trapped them all, 165 bats. Trapped them, put them in my truck, drove them 500 miles away, and released them into the wild. And they said, well, how did that go? Did the bats come back? And he said, oh, no, they followed my truck all the way back to the church. And he said, so they're still there, I can't get rid of them. The third pastor started laughing, and he said, you know what, I got rid of all my bats. And he said, well, how did you do it? He goes, well, all I had to do was baptize them and make them members of my church, and I never saw them again. I thought, okay, that's awesome. But therein lies our problem. Everyone just thinks like, oh, I just asked Jesus in my heart and I'm good to go, and not realizing that we have this huge responsibility. And we learned this from the Israelites walking out with some people. Exodus 12:40 says this. Now the length of the time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years to this very day, the Lord's divisions left Egypt. After 430 years, the Israelites were free. And I want you to really think about that. They were not under bondage to Pharaoh anymore. Gone. They were not forced to do hard labor anymore. It was all gone. They could leave behind their past for a brand new life in a new land. They just saw God do the most amazing miracles. They saw his unbelievable power. They just saw that he was the complete author of life and death. And you would think that knowing all of that when they got out of Egypt and got into the land of Israel, that they would be just lights to the nation. They'd be like, do you know what God just did for me? I got to tell you about him. But can I tell you something? That is not what happened. They got into their land and they got complacent and they walked away from God. They blended in with the pagan cultures, and we look around and we say, how in the world could they do that? And I want you to know that we do the exact same thing in 2018 in Phoenix, Arizona. We forget the magnitude of this. Because if Christianity is real and if Jesus really died on the cross and rose from the dead, it should change everything in our life. But the Israelites forgot. And I think we forget too. We forget what we have and what we should be so thankful for that we have to tell other people about. Kent Crockett talks of a man who he's always thankful for shoes because he grew up in the Depression. And when they had no money for shoes, so his shoes would get holes in it, so he'd take cardboard and he'd put it in the box, or the bottom of the shoe, and that's how he would walk around. And he said that when it would rain or snow, he'd have to continually change the cardboard, so he's so thankful for shoes. Like that's like his point of reference for thankfulness is this memory of his childhood without shoes. Our reference point for thankfulness should be that I was on my way to hell and somebody was gracious enough to tell me about Jesus. Jesus reached my hand, grabbed me out of that destination, and moved me over to here where I will spend eternity in heaven. Okay, that is just news that we should wake up in the morning and say, God, I don't know why you saved me, but you did, and I will never, ever be able to thank you enough for that. Our reference point needs to be that we know the God of the universe. We know him personally if you are a follower of Jesus. A young man told his mother one day, he came home and said, I'm an atheist. And his mom said, why in the world are you an atheist? And he said, well, I just don't believe in God anymore. And she said, well, if you don't believe in God, how do you think this world got here? And he said, I don't think anyone made it. It just happened. He said the next day he was walking through the kitchen. There was a sandwich that was made for him. And he walked by and he said, who made this sandwich? And his mother said, it just happened. Okay. See, that's what you and I know is like you can't have a creation like we do without a creator. I mean, this is a big deal. It's a big deal that you and I were born into darkness, separated from God, in bondage to sin. Hell was our destination. But God did something so amazing, and he stepped in and he sent Jesus, his son, to die on a cross and a horrible, horrible death. Take your sins and my sins, and rose from the dead to say, I conquered death, and I want you to spend eternity over here with me. But you need to give your life to me. We forget all of those things, and we buy into this whole ridiculous false version of Christianity where we say, oh, it's all about me. It's not all about us. Assuming no one's coming back next week after this. So I just know this. I'm taking out 30 tables next week because I know no one's coming back. But here's the deal. It's our job to tell people about Jesus. Luke 7, Jesus says this. Now, one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, so he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. And she stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and she began to wet his feet with her tears, and she wiped them with her hair and kissed them and poured perfume on them. Here's a woman who really understood that this was her destination over here. She gets that. She was a sinner. She was a prostitute. No one wanted her. Why in the world would Jesus ever want her? Why would Jesus ever forgive her for anything that she ever did? This is what's going on in her mind, and she's so overwhelmed by what Jesus has done for her. Verse 39 says, when the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who was touching him and what kind of a woman she is, that she's a sinner. Jesus answered him and said, Simon, I have something to tell you. He said, 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now, which one of them will love him more? Simon said, well, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt cancel. He says, you have judged correctly. Jesus says, then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little. And I read that and I started thinking, if you and I don't realize the magnitude of what's going on up here, then you know what? We're going to love Jesus little. And if we love Jesus little, we're not going to care to even share this story with anyone. But if we understand what just happened, that this whole great exchange happened, we will love Jesus a lot. And when we love Jesus a lot, we will tell everyone about him. We can't keep that news to ourselves. Mostly because for me, I'm so shocked that God saved me. I don't know why he would do that. I just don't. I get on my knees in the morning and I say, God, I don't know why you saved me. Out of all the people in the world, I'm so thankful for that. I want you to think of the 2 things that you have that you didn't have before. Here's one of them, peace of his presence. A lot of you here, you're going through a lot of stuff with kids and husbands, and I want a divorce, and I want this, and you're just a disaster. But somehow as a follower of Christ, you can have peace because you know the God of the universe lives in you, and he knows exactly what's going on, and he has a purpose for everything that's going on in your life. There's something about having that peace. Followers of Jesus have that. Followers of no Jesus do not have that. They don't. Everything is random in this world to them. I realized the importance of presence when my brother got so sick this summer, and I stayed with him a couple nights, but I'll never forget how my presence was fine. But the minute his wife, Dee, walked in the door, it was as if everything changed. Having her there changed how he looked at life. Just having her presence, it was so comforting to him. I saw that when we were putting this business deal together with Rob. Like, he would be so stressed, but the presence of our attorney's voice always calmed Rob. He would be worried about something at 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock, and he couldn't get a hold of his attorney, and he'd have a hard time sleeping. And the next morning, the minute he heard his voice, it was just like you could just see this calm come over Rob. That's what you and I have, that we should be so thankful for, that no matter, and sometimes I think we take it for granted because we're just so used to it that God is in control. But we need to not take things like that for granted. The second thing is hope. When my dad came home from the hospital, we didn't have much hope. He wasn't the same person as he was when he went into the hospital. His mind, he couldn't remember anything. He couldn't remember how to tie a shoe. He couldn't remember how to really walk. Like when he got out, we just kept saying, is this honestly what it's going to be like for the rest of his life? And a doctor said, just give it some time. It'll take 3 months, maybe 6 months. And I just went over to my dad's house on Sunday, and you can't even imagine, he's walking on his own, and he's like, he's out working in the office and working on drawings, and his mind is so sharp now, and I'm like, God, but someone gave us hope. And that's what you and I have. There was an interesting experiment, science experiment. A group of scientists put some rats in a big, what was it called? A tank. And it had smooth sides so the rats couldn't get out. They filled it with water. The rats were going to drown. They tried to figure out how long it would take them to where they would give up hope and drown, and it was 17 minutes. They took another group of rats, and they did the same thing. But this time, at about 16 minutes, instead of letting them die, they pulled them out of the tank, and they put them in their little cages, and they fed them and watered them and got them all warm and dry. And then a while later, they put them back in the tank. And they wanted to see if that would have changed the length that they would not give up. And the rats lasted 36 hours. Because they had hope, they knew that somebody had come in and rescued them before, and maybe, just maybe, someone would rescue them again. See, hope is something that you and I have, and as followers of Jesus, we have hope that we're going to spend eternity over here in heaven. Do you realize that most people in this world don't have any clue where they're going to go when they die? The first thing that Kathy had done to her, the first surgery, when she got out, I was there with her, and I said, she said, Lisa, I told the doctor, do not let me die. I am not ready to die yet. Do not let me die. And I think it's because she had no idea what was on the other side of death. When Nabil Qureshi found out he had cancer, he had to really stop and say, if I thought atheism was true, then it's over. I'm going back into the dust. Everything that's happened in my life doesn't even matter. But if I believe that Jesus is who he said he was, and that on the other side of death is when life truly begins. You and I have so much to be thankful for. This made me laugh. It was Thanksgiving Day. A town grouch was grumbling. Someone said, don't you have anything to be thankful for? And he said, nope. Okay, here's our picture, Melody. Here's our first one. This is what she said. Have you considered thanking God for pointing your nostrils downward? Okay, because here's the other picture. Do the next one. Because he could have created you with nostrils pointing upward, and when it rained, you would drown. Okay, there's something to be thankful for, even if you're grouchy, okay? You can look at your nose in the mirror and say, thank you, God, for not turning my nose upside down. I had dinner with my parents, and we were talking about dogs. And my mom said, did you read that thing on Facebook where a woman was driving, and she noticed this big black garbage bag tied up, and she said it was moving, and she didn't know what was wrong. She jumped out of her car and opened it up, and there was this beautiful black lab puppy. My first response was like, what is wrong with people that they would do something like that? Like, this world is just insane. I'm just like, who would do that? But in the course of talking about it, my mom said the woman kept the lab puppy. And it grew up to be the nicest, most loyal dog that she's ever had. And I said, well, that is because this dog owed that woman a gratitude that it could never, ever repay. And that's how it should be for you and I. That we have Jesus, and we have something that can never be repaid. If it's true, we're spending eternity with him in heaven. That's a big deal. It's not even just a big deal. It should be the most important thing that we will ever know in our entire life. And so here's how I want to leave today. What are we going to do about it? Do we really think this is a big deal? Because if we don't, then we're going to keep this news to ourselves. We're not going to look around and look for people to share this with, or invite people to Bible study, or invite them to your church. Get your church. This isn't about Bible study. This is about just, we have a bunch of stuff over there for you to just be able to hand out to people, not because we want to grow a Bible study, but because we want people to know Jesus. But you can find get little things from your church, hand them out, little posts, whatever it takes. A lot of you teach your own Bible studies in here. Make cards, invite people, get people to your Bible study. That's what this is all about, getting people to know know Jesus. And sometimes we just have to have something to give them, to hand them when you're in the line at a post office. I decided to do this. I got these little manila envelopes, and I put in here a Remind Me book, a one-way book, and a card for Bible study. And I keep a couple of those now with me, and I keep them in my purse. So when I go to a restaurant, I'm like, all right, God, someone here needs you. So if it's the waitress, you need to really let me know. And I'll hand it to her and say, hey, do you go to church? Always open with that, because that tells you everything you need to know about the person. Do you go to church? If she says no, I give it to her. If she says yes, I usually give it to her anyway. So either way is fine. But here's what I realized from Kathy. The time might be of the essence. And I realized with her that there's absolutely no do-overs when someone dies. Our job is to share this good news with someone. And if you think someone's in the hospital, then you might need to open your mouth. 1 Corinthians 3:5. I don't even think I put this in your handout. Here's what the Apostle Paul says. What, after all, is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe. People came to believe because Paul and Silas, they all opened their mouth and talked to them about Jesus. He said in verse 6, I planted the seed, and Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God that makes it grow. I can share the gospel with people. It's not my responsibility to save them, and it's not yours either. It is our responsibility to plant, to water, but it's God's job to save. And I want you to know this. It all starts with one encounter, an encounter with somebody. And if we just plant the seed, I want you to know that that encounter just may change the eternal destination of who you're talking to. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for a great reminder that it's our job to say something. I pray that we'll walk out of here with new eyes to people we see at the gas station or at the grocery store or wherever, to say, God, if someone needs you, just help me to be able to say something encouraging. I don't even know what that means for each person, but I pray that you will change our lives to where we focus more on the people around us, because eternity is at stake. If there's someone here that doesn't know Jesus, I pray today is the day they say, Jesus, come in my life, change my destination from hell to heaven. And when they do, help them to be so grateful that they cannot keep that news to themselves. In Jesus' name, amen. You have to be reading your Bible. I can't tell you. I always say this. I don't know how it changes us. It just does. The sickness, the tragedy, the death, the kid on drugs, the whatever. God wants to use, well, where did God come from? And if he created us, who created him? And how is that we tend to look at every battle and every problem in this natural realm. Like what I see, but see, we don't get it here. Because we think Jesus asking him in our life just means, I get to go to heaven